Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a custom deep dive into, well, frankly, one of the most urgent but often overlooked ecological crises out there, the collapse of global freshwater biodiversity. Our main source for this is a really important synthesis paper. It came out in Biological Reviews back in 2019. The title is Emerging Threats and Persistent Conservation Challenges for Freshwater Biodiversity. It was led by Andrea J. Reid with a big international team.
Yeah, that paper is absolutely essential. Our mission today is basically to distill what it tells us. It's a critical update to an earlier review from 2006, and while things haven't gotten better, we're looking at the current state of rivers, lakes, wetlands, figuring out what's changed, what new dangers the Anthropocene, this current human-dominated era has introduced.
And maybe where we can still find some hope, some effective ways forward for you to think about.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay, let's dive right in then, because the numbers themselves are pretty striking. Freshwater ecosystems, we're talking rivers, lakes, wetlands, they only cover about, 2.3% of the Earth's surface?
Yeah.
Seems tiny.
It is tiny, yeah, geographically minimal. But here's the kicker. That tiny area holds at least 9.5% of all the planet's described animal species.
Wow, okay. Almost 10% of animals in just over 2% of the area.
Exactly. And it gets even more concentrated. If you look just at vertebrates, fish, amphibians, mammals, birds that rely on these habitats, about a third of all known vertebrate species depend on fresh water.
A third. So these places are incredibly rich, biologically speaking. Hotspots.
They're biodiversity hotspots, absolutely. Which means when they decline, it has this disproportionately huge impact on global biodiversity loss numbers. And unfortunately, that decline is exactly what Reid and her colleagues found. Comparing things to that 2006 baseline, well, the prognosis is considerably worse now.
How much worse?
The core finding is pretty alarming. They cite the Living Planet Index. It's the WWF metric tracking population sizes. For freshwater populations, it shows a decline of 83% between 1970 and 2014.
83%. Let me just repeat that. 83%. How does that compare to, say, oceans or forests?
It dwarfs them. The same index showed about a 36% decline in marine populations over a similar period and 38% for terrestrial systems.
So the loss in freshwater is happening more than twice as fast, closer to 4 times faster than on land.
That's right. It's a catastrophic rate of decline.
Yet you don't always hear about it with the same urgency as, say, rainforests or coral reefs.
No, and that's why the paper calls it an invisible tragedy. Part of it is these are dynamic systems naturally, right? And a lot of the damage happens literally underwater or in remote areas away from major population centers.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Pretty much. And we shouldn't forget the original threats identified back in 2006 are still very much active and in many cases getting worse.
Right, those were the big 5. Overexploitation, so overfishing mainly.
Overfishing, water abstraction, yeah. Then water pollution, changing river flows because of dams and diversions, habitat degradation like draining wetlands or altering riverbanks, and of course invasive species.
Those are still the foundation of the crisis.
Absolutely. But the 2019 paper really shines a light on what's new or what's become much, much worse since 2006. These are the novel challenges of the Anthropocene.
And they identified 12 specific emerging threats.
12 of them, yeah. Let's maybe group them a bit. We could start with some of the novel pollution stressors. These really fit that invisible tragedy theme because they often involve things we can't even see.
Okay, like what?
Well, first up, engineered nanomaterials, or ENMs.
Nanomaterials. So incredibly tiny manufactured particles used in electronics, cosmetics.
Exactly that. We're talking materials deliberately engineered at the nanoscale, 1 to 100 nanometers. They're everywhere now, in sunscreens, in packaging, in industrial processes.
And the problem is?
Their unique properties make them useful for us, but also mean their behavior and effects in the environment, especially on aquatic life, are really poorly understood. Plus, they're so widespread, coming from so many products, controlling their release is incredibly difficult. They're like this invisible dust settling everywhere.
Right. And related to tiny things we can't easily see is the whole microplastic issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. Microplastic pollution.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about plastics in the ocean, but freshwater rivers and lakes are the major pathways carrying that plastic from land to sea.
So it's not just an ocean problem.
Not at all. It's a huge freshwater problem, too. The paper points out that these tiny fragments, less than 5 millimeters, are ubiquitous. And interestingly, in freshwaters, a huge chunk of it, often over 75%, is microfibers.
Fibers, like from washing clothes.
Exactly. Synthetic fabrics shedding fibers every time they're laundered. These wash down the drain and into rivers.
And the impact.
Well, it's reached a point where in some studies, like one mentioned in the Danube River, the concentration of microplastics can actually be higher than the concentration of larval fish.
Wait, more plastic bits than baby fish?
Yes. Think about what that means for anything trying to feed in the water column or for the survival of those fish larvae themselves. It's a profoundly disturbing picture.
Definitely. Poisoning the cradle, essentially.
And it links to the next category, emerging contaminants. The focus here has shifted a bit. It's less about, say, a single factory pipe pouring out one toxic chemical.
Which is still a problem, obviously.
Still a huge problem, yes. But now we're also incredibly concerned about the long-term chronic effects of complex mixtures of chemicals, often at low concentrations.
Things like pharmaceuticals and personal care products washing down the drain.
Precisely. Antibiotics, painkillers, hormones from birth control pills, antidepressants, chemicals from soaps and lotions. They pass through wastewater treatment plants, often not fully removed, and end up in rivers and lakes globally.
And these can affect aquatic life even at low levels.
Especially fish, yes. There's particular concern about endocrine-disrupting chemicals. These can interfere with hormone systems, leading to things like feminization of male fish, what they call intersex development, or reduced reproductive success overall. It hits the fitness of populations hard.
Okay, so we've got these new chemical threats, but the paper also mentions something, well, quite different. Geochemical shifts, like losing essential nutrients.
Yeah, this one is really counterintuitive. We usually think of pollution as adding bad stuff, right? But one emerging threat is actually about the loss of something vital. Calcium.
Losing calcium, how does that happen?
It's mainly observed in softwater lakes, often in areas with bedrock like granite that doesn't have much calcium to begin with. Decades of acid rain leached calcium out of the surrounding soils. Then, even with cleaner air, things like intensive forestry can prevent that calcium from replenishing in the catchment.
And why is calcium so important?
It's absolutely crucial for organisms with shells or exoskeletons. Think snails, mussels, and particularly key zooplankton species like large-bodied Daphnia. They need a lot of calcium to build their carapace.
Daphnia, those little water fleas.
Yeah.
They're important filter feeders, right?
Hugely important. They graze on algae, keeping water clear, and they're a vital food source for fish. But when calcium levels drop too low, these big Daphnia struggle to survive.
And what happens then? Does something else take over?
Yes, and this leads to what the paper calls the jellification of lakes.
Jellification sounds weird.
It is weird. What happens is, as the high calcium Daphnia decline, they get replaced by competitors that need much less calcium. One key player is called Holopedium glacialis. It doesn't need much calcium because it surrounds itself in this thick, gelatinous, jelly-like coat.
So the lake literally gets more jelly-like.
In a sense, yes. The dominant zooplankton changes from this efficient, calcium-rich filter feeder to this jelly-clad organism. This can mess up the whole food web, potentially leading to more algal blooms because Holopedium isn't as good a grazer, and its jelly coat can apparently even clog water intake filters for drinking water supplies.
Wow. So fixing that isn't about removing a pollutant, it's about restoring a missing nutrient. That's a different kind of challenge.
It completely changes the restoration perspective, doesn't it? You have to think about the whole watershed's chemistry.
Okay, what about climate change impacts? We hear a lot about warming, obviously.
Yeah, changing climates are a major theme. It affects everything. Species moving poleward or to higher altitudes, changes in the timing of breeding or migration, even changes in body size.
And it's not just gradual warming, it's extremes too.
Absolutely. The paper mentions things like cold shock events, sudden unseasonal cold snaps that can cause mass die-offs. There was a big example in Bolivia in 2010, huge numbers of fish killed in the Amazon basin due to unusually cold water temperatures.
And droughts.
Big impact there, too. Increased frequency and severity of droughts are causing some rivers that used to flow year-round perennial rivers to become intermittent, meaning they dry up for part of the year. Most resident aquatic species just can't survive that.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears slightly to connectivity and development. One threat you wouldn't necessarily think of is e-commerce.
Yeah, the internet as an invasion pathway. This is something that's really taken off since 2006. People can now buy and sell live plants and animals from all over the world incredibly easily through auction sites, forums, social media.
Like aquarium fish or pond plants?
Exactly. Aquatic weeds, exotic fish, amphibians, invertebrates. It completely bypasses traditional border controls and quarantine, creating this unregulated highway for invasive species to spread long distances and establish new populations. It's a massive headache for biosecurity.
And speaking of infrastructure, hydropower dams are still a huge issue.
A relentlessly growing issue. The paper flags a global boom in dam construction, particularly in Asia, South America, and Africa. They cite figures like 3,700 major dams either planned or already under construction.
3,700.
Yeah. And the cumulative impact is staggering. If all these go ahead, the estimate is that something like 93% of the world's total river volume will be affected by flow regulation or fragmentation.
Fragmenting rivers, blocking fish migration.
Blocking migration is key, but it's more than that. Dams alter flow regimes downstream, trap sediment, change water temperature. They can also worsen conditions for certain infectious diseases, and they create conditions where mercury, naturally present in soils, gets converted into methylmercury, a much more toxic form that builds up in fish.
Which then affects people eating the fish, right? Food security issues.
Big food security and health implications, especially for communities relying heavily on river fish.
Then there are the more subtle urban stressors, light and noise pollution.
Yeah, often overlooked but increasingly recognized. Artificial light at night, Alan, messes with natural cycles. For instance, many zooplankton, like our friend Daphnia, migrate up and down in the water column daily. Artificial light can disrupt that migration pattern, which has knock-on effects through the food web.
And noise. From boats, maybe.
Boats, shoreline construction, traffic nearby. Underwater noise has been shown to increase stress hormones like cortisol in fish. It can make them less efficient at foraging for food, more vulnerable to predators. It's another layer of chronic stress.
So many interacting pressures.
That's the final key point here. Cumulative stressors. None of these threats, the old ones, the new ones, operate in a vacuum. They interact. Sometimes one masks another, sometimes they amplify each other, leading to unexpected outcomes or ecological surprises.
Which must make managing these systems incredibly complex.
Hugely complex. You might fix one problem, like pollution from a specific factory, but if the river flow is still completely wrong because of a dam, or if an invasive species has taken over, you might not see much ecological recovery. Figuring out the critical bottleneck is key.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty grim picture. An accelerating crisis, complex new threats. Does the paper offer any way forward? Any hope for what they call a good Anthropocene?
It does, thankfully. It highlights some really important mitigation tools and conservation opportunities, some of which are quite novel themselves.
Like what?
Well, a big one on the assessment side is environmental DNA, or eDNA.
Right, sampling water to find traces of DNA shed by organisms.
Exactly. Instead of having to physically catch or see an animal, you can just filter water samples and analyze the DNA fragments left behind: skin cells, mucus, waste. It's revolutionizing biodiversity monitoring.
Also,
You can use it for targeted surveillance, like, is this rare endangered fish still present in this river? Or you can use it more broadly to get a snapshot of the entire fish or amphibian community present. It's potentially much faster, cheaper, and less invasive than traditional surveys, especially for detecting things that are rare or elusive.
that sounds like a game changer for tracking biodiversity.
It really could be. Then on the restoration side, the paper strongly advocates for dam removal.
Taking dams out rather than just trying to mitigate their effects.
Yes. It points to the experience in the U.S., where over 1,200 dams have been removed in the last few decades. And the results are often remarkably positive and surprisingly fast. Rivers can start restoring their natural channels and processes within years, not centuries.
That's much faster than I would have thought.
Yeah, the physical system can bounce back quickly. And it contrasts sharply with things like fishways or fish ladders.
Which are often built to help fish get past dams.
Right, but the paper is pretty critical, calling them often failed technology. They might work for some specific strong-swimming fish, like salmon, but they're often ineffective for many other species, and they do absolutely nothing for all the other aquatic life, insects, mussels, plants that also need connected rivers. Dam removal restores connectivity for everything.
But removing dams isn't always feasible, politically or economically, right?
Yeah.
Especially large ones.
No, it's often difficult, which is why another key concept is environmental flows, or e-flows.
E-flows. What are those exactly?
It's about managing the water that is released from dams or allocated for abstraction in a way that mimics the natural pattern of highs and lows that the river ecosystem evolved with.
So not just a constant minimum flow, but deliberately creating artificial floods or periods of lower flow at the right times of year.
Precisely. Releasing pulses of water to trigger fish spawning, or maintain wetland habitats downstream, or allow sediment transport. It's about managing the variability of flow, not just the volume, to support ecological functions and life cycles. It requires sophisticated understanding, but it's crucial where dams remain.
Makes sense. And the paper stresses the human dimension too, doesn't it? These aren't just wilderness areas.
Absolutely critical point. Freshwater ecosystems are biodiversity hotspots, yes, but they are also essential human life support systems. We rely on them for drinking water, for agriculture, for industry, for transport, for flood control.
And for food, directly.
Immense food resource. The paper cites that freshwater fisheries provide the primary source of animal protein for around 158 million people globally, especially in developing countries.
158 million people relying directly on river and lake fish for protein.
Yeah, and this contribution is often completely undervalued or just ignored when big decisions are made about water management, like building a new dam for hydropower versus protecting fisheries. We need hybrid approaches that explicitly value both the biodiversity and these crucial ecosystem services for people.
So wrapping up, we have this kind of paradox. The pressures are immense, getting worse, with new insidious threats emerging.
Right. The 83% decline, the 12 emerging threats.
But we also have tools and solutions that do work. Things like eDNA for monitoring, dam removal for restoration, e-flows for better management, strong regulations like the EU Water Framework Directive, grassroots citizen action.
The solutions exist or are developing rapidly. The science is largely there. The biggest obstacle, as the paper concludes, isn't really scientific or technical anymore.
It's political and institutional will.
Exactly. It's the institutional and political gap. And the paper points out a really glaring example: the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Well, SDG 14 is life below water. Sounds relevant, right?
Right.
But it focuses exclusively on marine environments, oceans, and seas. There's no equivalent SDG dedicated specifically to protecting life in inland waters, despite them being arguably the most imperiled ecosystems on the planet.
So freshwater life just falls through the cracks at that highest global policy level.
Largely, yes. It gets lumped under SDG 6 on water and sanitation, which is mostly about human water use, or bits might fall under SDG 15 on life on land. But it lacks that dedicated focus. It's a major policy failure.
Which means less attention, less funding, less coordinated action.
Precisely. So the authors make a strong plea for the freshwater science and policy community to really engage with global biodiversity frameworks, like the follow-up to the Aichi targets under the Convention on Biological Diversity, to push for specific, measurable goals for freshwater ecosystems.
We need concrete targets, not just general aspirations. Targets for things like river connectivity, controlling plastic pollution, managing chemical contaminants.
Exactly. Goals that address these systemic drivers, both the old and the new invisible ones.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. If you were setting those global targets, trying to bridge that gap, and finally give freshwater biodiversity the prominence it desperately needs, what specific numerical goals would you propose? How would you ensure these emerging threats, the plastics, the chemicals, the flow alterations, are tackled head-on? Something to think about, because the urgency isn't fading.